Hello everyone, I'm Eternal Flame here, and welcome back to What If Yuki Trained Yuji, where last time on the last part, Mahito had been defeated and absorbed by Kenjaku, Jogo was killed by Yuki, and Gojo was ultimately sealed away, with Dagon being defeated by the group of 6 sorcerers, those 6 sorcerers being Naobito, Nanami, Ino, Maki, Nobara, and Megumi. And finally, Yuji utilizing his hidden power that he was born with due to being born with one of the fingers of Sukuna, thanks to the help of Yuki as well as Mahito enraging him enough to actually push him into using this power. And now our cast is put at a crossroads, as they have 2 options. Either A, they have to leave Shibuya in order to help civilians out from all of the curses that are being released, as there are millions of them being released right now, or they can go to free Gojo. However, they ultimately do not know where Gojo is, or where Kenjaku currently is sitting down and waiting for Gojo to be finished sealing. They don't even know if Gojo can even be freed right now or not, so they ultimately choose to separate in order to help save people rather than going to save Gojo. They'll find another way to free Gojo later. However, Yuki leaves on her own as she has somewhere else she needs to go to, because she is someone she needs to get answers from, that person being Tengen. After all, if someone would be able to get answers on how to free Gojo and how to save them, it would be them. So Yuki leaves and tells Choso that she's going to pick up Eso and Kechizu on the way, so no need to worry about them. Furthermore, with Gojo sealed, this leads into the higher-ups announcing the same announcement they made before, with Yuta Akotsu being appointed as Yuji's executioner. However, Yuta doesn't have anywhere near as good an alibi in comparison to what he would have before, because Sukuna never cut off Inumaki's arm in this, so he's not exactly going to have as good an alibi, and it just forces him to make a binding vow, which is going to happen either way. As Yuji, Todo, and Choso basically spent the entire night executing all of the cursed spirits that Kenjaku had released in Shibuya, until eventually they end up meeting with Naoya and then later on Yuta. However, in Naoya's attempt to attack them, while he does succeed in blitzing both Choso and Todo, he doesn't actually succeed in blitzing Yuji, with Yuji successfully blocking Naoya's attack, as that completely caught Naoya off guard and made him realize he was definitely going to need to take at least Yuji seriously. However, fortunately for Naoya, he's not going to need to fight against Yuji because Yuta is going to take him on instead, with Todo moving to back up Choso as the 2 of them go on to fight Naoya and absolutely destroy him. Keep this in mind, Choso already beat Naoya on his own in canon, so we are going to have a stronger Todo that is going to be assisting in this battle as well, and yeah, it's wraps for Naoya. Unfortunately though, all 3 of them get knocked out by Yuta later on, mainly because Yuta immediately puts on the ring and doesn't really play around with Yuji this time around. The main reason is because he could tell that Yuji was most certainly strong, and was an opponent he was probably going to need to put the ring on that he couldn't take on in base. After all, while Yuji wasn't as strong as his Chapter 214 counterpart, he was significantly stronger than his Culling Games variation at this current point in time. And while Yuta was somewhat confident he could handle that power level in base form, he didn't really want to risk it and just wanted to get this out the way as fast as possible. After all, he didn't really see any enjoyment in fighting. This leads into Yuji being brought back to the Tomb of the Star with Choso as well as Todo. Megumi doesn't need to give Yuji a pep talk in this timeline, so the 2 of them are doing pretty good. However, Megumi does tell Yuji that Tsumaki was ensnared in the Culling Games, and that she was currently in one of the barriers, so he was going to need his help in order to free his sister, as they were reunited with several of their friends, those friends of course being Yuki, Nobara, Maki, as well as Eso and Kechizu, and Nanami, who was wearing an eye patch over his missing eye and had some bandages on him. After the discussion, it resulted in the group having to split up, with Eso, Kechizu, and Choso as well as Todo choosing to stay behind with Yuki in order to defend against Kenjaku. Meanwhile, Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara decided they were going to go to the Tokyo colonies in order to see if they could find the people who they were looking for, those people being Higuruma, the Angel, as well as Kashimo, in an attempt to get their points, as well as an attempt to get their ally on their side, that being Hikari. Yuta already left in order to find the Sendai colony, which goes the exact same way as it does in canon. The Zenin clan massacre also ends up going the same way, so Maki does end up awakening. Furthermore, the battle against Cursed Naoya also ends up going the exact same as well. Now, they are actually able to recruit Hikari without any difficulty in this timeline, mainly because of the fact that Yuji didn't really fight back against Hikari in canon, he more so just took his hits in his attempt to get Hikari onto their side. So the same is going to happen here, but it's just going to result in Yuji taking significantly less damage from Hikari's hits. Similar to canon, Nobara, Megumi, as well as Yuji end up getting separated from each other. However, in this timeline, I am going to say that Nobara actually ends up finding Hana. Nobara doesn't actually try to go for violence against Hana, mainly because they are trying to get her on their side, so she explains the situation, and the second that she mentions Megumi, she actually ends up getting Hana on their side pretty easily as well. Or at least Hana more open to the idea of having negotiations with them, which ends up going pretty well for them. This also leads into Megumi absolutely destroying Regi's group, mainly because of the fact that we just have a stronger Megumi here, And considering Megami in canon already beat them in an extremely difficult fight, now we have a Megami who has a few more Shikigami as well as a domain expansion and is even stronger than he was before thanks to going through Yuki's training. Yeah, he's absolutely going to destroy Regi's group. And Yuji versus Higuruma also ends up going pretty similar as well, other than it just being easier for Yuji instead, mainly because he does have a stronger physical base form thanks to his power being unlocked and that amplifying his physicals in his base. So I still see Yuji calling a retrial in this timeline, however the crime he is going to be called for is going to be different. This crime is going to be for attacking Megami and almost ending Megami's life back at the detention center. This is something that Yuji would immediately accept the blame for and not try and defend himself for that. After all, Yuji would feel even more guilty about that than he would about Shibuya. At least in Shibuya, it wasn't his choice for Sukuna to do everything that had happened. Here, he willingly gave in to Sukuna in an attempt to kill the finger bearer. However, those eyes of guilt that Yuji had reminded Higuruma of all the people that he wanted to help. All the people that he wanted to help but ultimately ended up failing because of the system itself. He was an amazing lawyer, but he still failed those people, and he refused to fail somebody else. After all, while Yuji might have felt that it was his fault, Higuruma didn't really think it was his fault. He knew from the evidence that there was no other option other than to give it to Sukuna or else they would have died. It was a do or die situation, and he picked the option that would result in them not dying. He had no idea that this would be the consequence of doing such a thing. Plus, most of all, it wasn't like he willingly chose to attack Megami. Sure, he gave in to Sukuna to allow him to attack the finger bearer, but it was ultimately still Sukuna who attacked Megami. Which leads into Higuruma being defeated once more and joining the good guy's side. However, now we return back to the other side of our cast, Yuki, Choso, Eso, Kechizu, and Todo, as they're all preparing in order to deal with Kenjaku for when he inevitably arrives. Noticeably though, all 5 of them were already rather close with each other and prepared to do this. After all, they had known each other for over 2 months now in preparation, and Todo and Yuki had known each other for significantly longer. However, I still see Yuki and Choso having the same conversation about how Choso has died as a curse and now is a human, just as Eso and Kechizu are humans as well. Sure, Kechizu and Eso looked more like monsters than humans, but there was also someone who was a literal panda walking among them as well. And if they consider Panda a human, then it clearly wasn't based on appearance. It was based on who you were as a person. And in Yuki's mind, they didn't fit as curses at all. No, they fit as humans, so they would be treated as humans by Yuki and Todo. This was when Choso volunteered himself to go first in the battle against Kenjaku. He had a plan. He wanted to at least try his best to lure out some of Kenjaku's abilities in order for the others to see what Kenjaku could be capable of, so they could have something that might be able to possibly assist them. However, this was when Tengen revealed something else as well, as Tengen revealed that they are going to have 2 more additional allies on their side that will be able to help them in their battle against Kenjaku. As a few days pass until Kenjaku arrives at the Tomb of the Star in order to retrieve Tengen, where he is met with by Choso, Eso, and Kechizu as all 3 of them prepare to face off against Kenjaku. The Free's goal is rather simple, and that is to reveal something about Kenjaku's arsenal in an attempt to give Yuki as best of a chance as possible. This also leads into the conversation between Kenjaku and his brothers going the exact same, with Choso questioning why he wants Yuji and why Yuji is so important to Kenjaku, and Kenjaku giving the entire explanation about what his plan is and why he's doing everything that he is doing. Choso then started the battle off by firing a piercing blood right at Kenjaku. At the same time, Eso jumped high into the air and fired out a large amount of blood vectors towards his direction. All the while, Kechizu began to rapid fire large amounts of blood at Kenjaku's direction, but Kechizu's role was a bit different from the other 2. At the same time, in the area where Todo and Yuki were watching this from, a picture of Kenjaku was taken, as the 2 people who had joined their side was Nanako and Mimiko. Sukuna had never executed them in this timeline, so they decided they were going to join sides with Tengen in an attempt to finally kill Kenjaku. Kenjaku was dodging several of the blood vectors with relative ease, as he sent out several curse spears both towards Eso as well as Kechizu's direction, with the 2 of them not being fast enough to keep up and being slammed into the wall, as Kenjaku himself decided he was going to take Choso on in hand-to-hand combat, as he avoided another one of Choso's piercing bloods before punching him in the gut and then sweeping him by the foot. As Kenjaku asked Choso if he knew what the definition of a special grade sorcerer was, which that definition was someone who could single-handedly overthrow a country. He had expected that every single one of the death paintings would be capable of overthrowing a country, of achieving this special grade level, however none of them were as impressive as he hoped they would be. None of these combinations of curses and humans were anywhere near as good as he thought, as he stepped on Choso's head. As he then leaned closer to Choso and told him that the only one that had some value was Yuji because of Yuji's purpose of becoming the Eye of the Storm of Curses. as Kenjaku then opened his mouth and fired out a large burst of blood right towards Kenjaku's direction, trying to protect his brother and get him away from him. However, Kenjaku released another curse spirit in order to shield himself taking the blow. He didn't even have to move in order to handle this, and he told Choso that all three of them were absolute disappointments. Maybe if they just fulfilled their role and died in peace, then he wouldn't have to look down on such disappointments. Now, it was one thing for Choso himself to be insulted, that he could accept, but there was one thing he would never accept, which was his brothers being insulted, his brothers being called disappointments and wastes. He could never accept them being talked about like this. As a massive explosion of blood erupted from Choso's body, pushing Kenjaku off of him, while Choso's shirt was completely destroyed. As a slightly intrigued expression entered onto Kenjaku, not fully, he was still a bit bored, but now he was rather curious to see what power was about to be drawn out. As out from the massive blood explosion, it began to shrink down and turn into a piercing blood, the most powerful one that Choso has ever fired, as he fired it at Kenjaku. This one was much faster than before. However, even with the sudden speed increase of this piercing blood, it wasn't enough to hit him, as he was able to dodge just the same way that he had done before, as Choso jumped high up into the air and began to mimic Esso and Kenjaku's techniques, first mimicking Esso's technique by sending out several blood vector lines towards Kenjaku's direction. However, even that attack Kenjaku was able to dodge. In fact, he was dodging it much easier considering it wasn't anywhere near the speed of piercing blood. That was just made to be a distraction, as Choso's arm was launched out and grabbed onto Kenjaku before pulling him towards himself. But Kenjaku then launched out curse spirits out from his legs in order to pull him into the ground, and instead pulled Choso towards his direction. Or at least forced Choso to let go. However, this was when Choso moved on to his next step, as he did let go of Kenjaku before several supernovas rose out around him and began to explode. Or at least were about to explode, until a wave of gravity hit them and slammed all of them into the ground, as well as slamming Choso into the ground as well. However, this was when Yuki entered in, as several parts of the palace began to move Kejizu, Esso, as well as Choso away in order to allow Yuki to handle Kenjaku in a one-on-one matchup. As Kenjaku started the battle by summoning Ganesha, which was immediately torn right through by Garuda, before Yuki went in for hand-to-hand combat. As Kenjaku attempted to lift up both of his arms in order to prep himself to block against Yuki's hit, but Yuki's punch went right through his arms and sent him flying backwards. However, instead of the feeling of a wall, Kenjaku was then met with the feeling of a foot against his back, as Todo had now appeared behind him and kicked him right back towards Yuki's direction. Todo being there was going to make things significantly harder, as he wasn't going to give Kenjaku a single point or chance to rest. However, this wasn't anything considered too impossible for Kenjaku to handle, as he then summoned several curse spirits towards him in order to propel him away from the two of them. Curse spirit manipulation, at least at its base principles, was not going to be too useful against the two of them. Todo would just use the curses as more things to swap Yuki with, and of course Yuki was able to destroy any of the curses that Kenjaku had in one hit. So Kenjaku decided that he was going to end this right here and now, which the way he was going to end this was by lifting up his hands in order to cast his domain expansion. That would be his best way to eliminate both Todo as well as Yuki. However, a moment before his hands could come together in order to make the proper hand sign, they were forced apart, as Naniko was activating her technique photo manipulation in order to force their hands apart. Now Naniko couldn't pull this off for too long, however she only needed to do it for a couple of seconds. However, not just to the surprise of Naniko Mimiko being here, but also the failure of his own domain, it was the opening that they needed, as both Yuki and Todo rushed towards Kenjaku. As Todo clapped, swapping places with Choso, while at the same time, Yuki went in, and Yuki landed a punch on Kenjaku's left hand, while Choso landed a piercing blood cutting off Kenjaku's right hand. And this was bad. Kenjaku would realize in this moment he had heavily underestimated them, and going for a direct assault in the way that he did was a very bad mistake. However, that gave Kenjaku an idea, as Kenjaku had a new plan. He was too quick to dismiss this curse technique. It would definitely not work in order to kill Yuki and the others, but it would certainly work to at least hold them off for a couple of seconds for him to search. As suddenly thousands, no, hundreds of thousands of curse spirits began to come out from Kenjaku in a massive wave, most of them of course being grade 4s and grade 3s, mainly there to push Yuki as well as Choso and Todo away from them, as they began to fill the Tomb of the Star like a massive tsunami, going through each and every room, each and every building, while Kenjaku sank into the wave of curses he had just made. He knew with Yuki there it wouldn't be long until they were all dealt with, so we would have a limited amount of time. At the same time, he used RCT on his two hands to recover them properly while swimming through the wave of curses. In truth, he had no desire to really fight right now, especially not in this circumstance. He could wait. And it didn't take long until he eventually found the tree where Tengen's true body was residing. All the while, curse spirits were being fought off, but with every single curse spirit that was destroyed, tens of them took their place. Now, of course, they weren't able to damage any of the sorcerers present, but they were still an annoyance nonetheless. However, the wave began to get smaller and smaller as more of them were getting absorbed back into Kenjaku, and as they were all looking up, Kenjaku simply gave them a wave, before activating the curse spirit that originally allowed him to leave Shibuya, and using that one to portal himself out of here, and using that one as an escape route for himself from the Tomb of the Star. And that is the end of this part of What If Yuki Trained Yuji. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you all have a good day. And also comment down what your thoughts are on this episode, as well as what's